In 1910, a report funded by a steel baron's fortune closed 31 American medical schools in a single generation. Schools that taught the same plant medicine your great-great-grandmother kept in a tin box on her shelf. They said it was for safety. Follow the money, and it gets simpler than that. I'm Amos Walker. I live off-grid on a ridge in the North Carolina mountains. In the same holler my grandmother worked her whole life as the woman folks walked to when the doctor was 2 counties and no money away. I still have her tin box. I still use half of what's in it. Here's the truth. Nobody puts on a label. These 25 things weren't abandoned because they stopped working. They were abandoned because somebody got rich the day you forgot them. Number 13 on this list is the exact medicine that got legislated out of American medical schools on purpose. Number 5 was banned by the federal government in 1960, and the company that benefited is still on your grocery shelf today. And there's one rule, just one, that kept every single item in Grandma's medicine chest from ever hurting a soul. They never wanted you to hear it. We'll get there. Before we count it down, here's where you come in. Drop a comment and tell me which of Grandma's old remedies your own family swore by. I'll be reading through them as we go. Now let's count it down. First up on the list is the salt water gargle. Every grandmother in these mountains kept a chipped mug by the sink for it. Half a teaspoon of salt stirred into warm water, gargled at the first hint of a sore throat. It works on plain osmosis. The salt pulls swelling out of raw throat tissue and thins the mucus sitting on it. A Japanese trial tracking regular gargling for 2 months found it cut upper respiratory infections measurably compared to doing nothing at all. No pill, no prescription, no doctor's note required. Never was. Still legal, still free, still works. Next up is witch hazel. The Mohegan and the Potawatomi were pressing the bark of this shrub onto swelling and bug bites long before a man learned the trick from a native healer and put it in a bottle in the 1840s. The tannins in that bark tighten skin and calm minor irritation. Real chemistry, not folklore. Here's what they don't advertise. The FDA still recognizes witch hazel today, right now, as an official over-the-counter skin protectant for minor cuts, scrapes, and bites. One of the only entries on this whole list the government never took a swing at. Coming in next is chicken soup for a cold. Sounds like something your mother said just to get you to eat. In the year 2000, a doctor at the University of Nebraska put chicken soup in a lab dish next to human white blood cells and found it slowed down the exact inflammatory process that makes a cold feel miserable. Measurably in a peer-reviewed medical journal, not a cookbook. Add the sweet potato, the parsnip, the celery, the hours of steam and salt, and you've got the closest thing to a legitimate anti-inflammatory this country ever cooked in a stock pot. Nobody banned it. Nobody had to. They just sold you a syrup instead. Another product worth calling out is baking soda. 2 ways. A half teaspoon stirred into water calms heartburn in minutes. A plain base neutralizing the acid in your stomach. Nothing mystical about it. A thick paste of the same box on a bee sting neutralizes the acid in the venom and takes the fire out of it inside the hour. Under $1 a box. Sits in every kitchen in America right now. Mostly used for baking cookies instead of the thing it was actually good at. Now here's where it starts to turn. Now we have willow bark. The pain medicine before pain medicine had a company behind it. Chew the inner bark or steep it as tea, and you're getting salicin, the same compound your body converts toward the exact chemical in a modern aspirin tablet. German chemists isolated it in the 1820s. 70 years later, a Bayer chemist refined it into something gentler on the stomach. And Bayer didn't just sell the pill. In 1899, they patented the name, aspirin. A free tree became a trademark, and the tree got left behind in the process. The willow's still standing at the edge of every creek in this state. Neighbor. Nobody bothered to uninvent it. They just stopped telling you it was there. That brings us to a spoonful of honey at bedtime for a child's cough. In 2007, researchers at Penn State ran the actual trial. Real medicine, buckwheat honey against the store-bought cough syrup on over 100 children. Honey won outright. The syrup performed no better than nothing at all. Your grandmother wasn't guessing when she stirred a spoonful into hot water for a coughing child at midnight. She was right, and it took modern medicine about 80 years to catch up and admit it in print. Just don't give it to a baby under 1-year-old. That's a real rule, and we'll come back to why rules like that matter most of all. Next up is ginger root for a sour stomach. Chewed raw, steeped as tea, or grated into food, the compounds in ginger speed along a slow stomach and quiet the exact nerve signal that triggers nausea. The same pathway modern anti-nausea medication targets. Multiple clinical trials on pregnant women found it worked about as well as vitamin B6 for morning sickness, with none of the side effects of a prescription. Grew wild in her garden. Cost her nothing. Still doesn't. Another product worth calling out is the mustard plaster. Mustard powder mixed with flour and warm water, spread thin on a cotton cloth, laid on a congested chest for no more than 15 minutes. Mustard is what's called a rubefacient. It pulls blood to the surface of the skin, and the heat loosens what's sitting in the lungs beneath it. Every farmhouse in Appalachia kept dry mustard in the cabinet for exactly this. It's also the last home remedy for chest congestion this country ever needed to buy nothing for. Because right about here is where a company stepped in and started selling the feeling instead of the cure. Now here's the turn. Number 17. Around 1894, a pharmacist not 200 miles from where I'm standing, Greensboro, North Carolina, took what mountain grandmothers already knew about a hot chest rub and put menthol and camphor into a jar of petroleum jelly. He called it a croup salve. By 1918, during the worst flu this country's ever seen, it was in almost every home in America, and it made his family a fortune that's still spinning today. Nothing wrong with the jar, neighbor. The science in it is real, and I keep one myself. But somewhere in that 100 years, we stopped remembering that Grandma was already doing the same thing for free with mustard and goose grease, and started thinking we needed the jar to do it at all. Now we have slippery elm bark for a raw throat. The inner bark is full of a natural mucilage, a slick gel that coats an irritated throat the same way a modern lozenge does, because that's exactly where lozenge companies got the idea. Native peoples and mountain settlers alike chewed it, steeped it as tea, boiled it into a thin gruel for a sick child who couldn't keep anything else down. Still grows wild along the creek bottoms. Still works exactly the same. Number 15, and I'll tell you plain. Not everything Grandma did held up. A spider web pressed onto a bleeding cut was common practice in these hills. The web forms a rough mesh that helps blood pool and clot, and old-timers swore by it. But a web pulled off a porch rafter carries whatever that spider's been dragging through, and modern wound care will tell you plainly it raises real infection risk for very little benefit over a clean cloth and firm pressure. I owe you that truth as much as I owe you the winds. Use pressure and a clean rag. Save the web for the porch. That brings us to yarrow, the old soldier's herb. Some called it woundwort, some called it nosebleed weed. Crush the fresh leaf and press it straight onto a cut, and a compound in the plant called achilline measurably speeds up clotting. One study found it cut clotting time by nearly a third. Battlefield medics were using it for that exact reason back to ancient Greece. Every granny woman in these mountains kept a patch of it growing by the porch steps for the same reason her own grandmother did. If you're finding this useful and don't want to miss what's still ahead on this list, hit subscribe. There's a run of turns coming up that changes how you'll look at half the cabinet in your own kitchen. And here's the biggest turn on this whole list. Now we have herbal medicine itself. The entire tradition your grandmother's cabinet was built on. In 1910, a report funded by the Carnegie Foundation graded every medical school in this country, and it graded the ones teaching botanical medicine straight to the bottom. Within 30 years, nearly every one of the roughly 30 schools in America still teaching plant-based medicine had shut its doors. Not because the medicine failed a single patient, but because the money behind American medical education had already decided which kind of doctor it wanted to fund, and it wasn't the kind who could be paid in eggs and a chicken instead of cash. Your grandmother didn't stop believing in her tea and her tincture and her poultice. She just lost anywhere left to send you to learn it proper. That's not an old wives' tale, neighbor. That's an old wives' cure. The schools just quit teaching it. Coming in next is plantain. Not the banana, the broadleaf weed growing in your own yard right now. Chew a leaf or crush it and press the juice onto a cut, a sting, a sore that won't close. 2 compounds in that weed fight infection and push skin to regenerate itself. In one clinical trial of over 150 patients with pressure ulcers, 95% fully healed on plantain compared to 70% without it. Your grandmother called it a drawing poultice and pulled it out from under your own feet. She was closer to a hospital-grade treatment than either of you knew. Next up is golden seal root, the Cherokee's eye wash and stomach remedy, rich in a compound called berberine that fights bacteria on contact. 19th century doctors adopted it wholesale, and golden seal eye wash sat in the official United States pharmacopoeia, the government's own list of legitimate medicine, clear into the middle of the 20th century. Then it quietly dropped off the list. Not from any proof it failed, but as the profession it came from kept losing ground, it never got back. Modern doctors will tell you not to put it near your eyes today, and that caution's fair. But it earned its place in that book fair and square first. Here's a turn worth understanding, because it explains half of what's on this list. Now we have elderberry syrup. Cook the berries down with honey, and you've got compounds that physically block a flu virus from latching onto your cells. Real, measured, published science. So why can't the bottle on a store shelf say it treats the flu? In 1994, a law called DSHEA drew a hard line. An herb can be sold, but it can't legally claim to cure or treat anything, or it gets regulated like a drug overnight. That's not really a ban, neighbor. It's a gag order dressed up as a safety rule. Your grandmother didn't need the label to tell her elderberry worked. She'd already watched it work. Another product worth calling out is raw garlic, crushed and left to sit a few minutes before you eat it. That waiting matters. It lets an enzyme in the clove convert into allicin, a compound that attacks bacteria, fungus, and parasites on a cellular level, broad enough that laboratories today still test it against drug-resistant infections. Your grandmother crushed it into everything for flavor, and never once needed the biochemistry to know it was doing more than seasoning the pot. That brings us to cod liver oil, the spoonful every child in this country choked down before breakfast for 100 years straight. It's loaded with vitamin D, and vitamin D deficiency is exactly what caused rickets, the bone-softening disease that crippled poor children by the thousands in the smoky industrial cities of the early 1900s. By the 1930s, that one greasy spoonful, alongside fortified milk, had all but wiped rickets out of America. No regulation ever touched it. It didn't need to be banned. It just needed 100 years to be believed. Now we have pine needle tea. In the winter of 1535, French explorer Jacques Cartier had a crew dying of scurvy on the St. Lawrence River. 8 already dead, 50 more given up on. A native man showed them how to boil the bark and needles of a local evergreen and drink it. Within days, men who couldn't stand were walking. A whole tree's worth of needles, boiled down, was gone inside a week because it worked that fast. That tea was loaded with vitamin C the men hadn't had all winter. Every mountain family after that kept the same trick in their back pocket for the exact same reason. This is the one I owe you straight, because half of what made it onto this list only works because I'm being honest about the other half. Another product worth calling out is butter on a burn. Common as Sunday dinner in these mountains, and it was wrong. Grease traps the heat against the skin like a blanket instead of letting it out, and it can turn a minor burn into a real one, non-sterile fat and all. Worse, turpentine, a few drops on a sugar cube, dosed to children for worms and coughs clear into the 1900s. It's a genuine poison. A few tablespoons can kill a child outright. Grandma's cabinet held real medicine and real mistakes side by side, and pretending otherwise does nobody in this holler any good. Cool water on a burn. Leave the turpentine on the shelf for varnishing furniture where it belongs. Now the last big turn before we get to the top. That brings us to sassafras root tea. Dug in the spring, shaved thin, and simmered low, the way it had been made on this continent for 300 years before anybody bottled it. In December of 1960, the FDA pulled the aromatic compound in sassafras oil out of the food supply. Every major root beer in America reformulated within 18 months, swapping the real root for a synthetic flavor cooked up by a handful of chemical companies up north, companies that did very well for themselves the day the real plant went missing from the label. The root's still legal to dig in most counties today, It just stopped being profitable to teach you how. Next up is plain raw honey, packed straight onto a wound. It pulls moisture out of the tissue, starves bacteria, and slowly releases a natural antiseptic as it breaks down. Mechanisms doctors can now explain in a laboratory instead of just trusting. Here's the part that should tell you everything. Hospitals today stock medical-grade honey dressings for real patients with real wounds, made from the same plant compounds your grandmother had sitting in a crock on the counter the whole time. It took the establishment 100 years to quietly start doing what she never stopped doing. Coming in next is the spring tonic. Sulfur stirred into blackstrap molasses, a spoonful for every soul in the house each April. My own grandmother made hers the same way hers had. The molasses carried real iron and minerals back into a body that had spent a winter on salt pork and dried beans. And the ritual of it, done together as a family every spring, was its own kind of medicine no pill has ever replicated. Call it folklore if you want, neighbor. I call it the reason nobody in my family went into spring thin and sick. Now we have activated charcoal for poison. Farm families kept it on hand for a child who'd swallowed something they shouldn't, going back over a century, long before anybody could fully explain why it worked. Today, walk into any emergency room in this country for a poisoning case, and there's a real chance the first thing they reach for is the exact same charcoal. Nobody suppressed this one. Nobody had to fight to keep it. It's the clearest proof on this whole list that old and modern medicine were never actually two different things. Sometimes they're just the same cabinet, wearing two different labels. Number one. And it isn't a remedy at all. It's the rule that ran underneath every single one of the 24 before it, the one I promised you at the start. Your grandmother's whole medicine cabinet worked and stayed safe for generations because of one discipline nobody ever wrote on a label. Small, plain, and only as much as the job needed. A spoonful, not a bottle. A pinch, not a handful. Once when it was needed, not every day, whether it was needed or not. That restraint is the actual medicine hiding inside every item on this list. And it's exactly the thing that never made it into a marketing campaign, because you can't sell a family's discipline. You can only sell a product. Your grandmother wasn't practicing folk superstition. She was practicing medicine with the one ingredient no company has ever figured out how to bottle, knowing exactly how much was enough and no more. That's not an old wives' tale, neighbor. That's an old wives' cure. And it's still sitting on your own back porch, waiting on you to go learn its name. So here's what I'm asking. Not all 25, just one. Walk your own fence line this week and learn the name of one plant already growing there. Plantain's probably closer than you think. Stir a half teaspoon of baking soda into water next time your stomach turns on you, instead of reaching for the cabinet full of pills. Ask whoever's oldest in your family if they remember a spring tonic, a poultice, a syrup nobody's made since they passed, and write it down before that recipe goes into the ground with them, because that's exactly how 30 schools worth of medicine disappeared in one generation, one silence at a time. Nobody's asking you to throw out what works today. I keep aspirin in my own cabinet right next to the willow bark. But your grandmother's medicine chest wasn't ignorance waiting to be corrected. It was knowledge waiting to be believed. That knowledge didn't die, neighbor. It just went quiet the day it stopped being profitable to teach. It's time somebody in your family started listening to it again, that somebody might as well be you. Keep the old ways close. Out here on this ridge, they're the only ones that ever kept me. That's the whole list. And it started with a tin box that never once left my grandmother's shelf. If this one landed, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We go back into this old cabinet regularly, and there's plenty more still in it. And tell me down in the comments which one of these your own family kept, because I'd bet good money somebody in your bloodline was doing half this list without ever once thinking of it as medicine. It was just Tuesday. It was just what you did when somebody got sick, and the nearest doctor